a lot of DAOs that's also being set up right now is kind of using some of these terminologies, such as DAOs, just for the sake of it being a bit of a hype thing. You know, it sounds quite good to be in Web3. It sounds quite good to use the web or like the word DAO, whereas in fact there are basically just like a online version of a corporation or something like that.
Hi everyone, it's Joy and Salimi here once again on another exciting episode of NewForum, and we're always happy to bring you awesome creators, founders, visionaries, and developers on our podcast.
And on today's episode, we have Stina Gustafsson, an independent curator and art strategist researching art and blockchain. And we will be chatting with her about understanding the complexity and roles in the art ecosystem, the potential of the intersection of blockchain and arts to democratize and create a more sustainable art world. Stina will also discuss the pros and cons of change for the individual versus change for a wider workforce. Hey, Stina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So could you, I guess, tell us about your journey as an independent curator and art strategist researching art and blockchain? Like, how did this all happen for you? And maybe your background experiences, that would be great.
Of course. So I actually started out studying photography for 2 years. So I come from slight creative background in terms of creating as well, but realized that it wasn't necessarily for me and got involved with organizing exhibitions, etc. Found my perfect education, which was in curation and art theory, studied that for 3 years. And then after that, went very quickly into working within the art world. So worked with a wide variety of roles within it, administration, basically anything that you can think of within it. I always had my curation practice on the side. And in 2018, I got approached by Maria Paula Fernandez, which is also a very dear friend of mine, asking if I wanted to curate the exhibition for the first East Berlin hackathon. I said yes to that. And that's kind of also how I ended on this very specific topic of art and blockchain. MP and I co-founded the art department for DoD together, which we've done lots of work. And since basically 2018, 2019, I've specifically concentrated on the intersection of art and blockchain. That is everything from digital art and kind of what this new technology might mean for the creation and what it might mean as a medium, but also how we can potentially use this technology to create some kind of change within the cultural workforce, how we can support roles and people who are not necessarily always heard or seen. So it kind of, the way I'm thinking about it is not just blockchain or that technology as a medium, but actually how it can be used within a systemic change.
What do you think about the roles and community building in Web3? Like, do we have to reconsider like group structures? Like, how do you build even communities around certain projects and things like that? I'm wondering what's your opinion on that?
I think that's a tricky one. I think there's, well, it's both easy and tricky, because I think it's like the whole idea of the space is basically built on community, but it also becomes complicated because it is all done online, which there are positive aspects. And I mean, the online has done build community and such as well, but I think it also kind of disconnects us in a way, in ways where the physical space would create a stronger connection, if that makes any sense. I think it's a natural process. I mean, I think building community around the space is already done and has been done basically since the beginning of it. And I think that's just something that will naturally continue to happen. I think maybe as we're moving forward with these building of the communities, it's important to have more voices heard within the communities and not necessarily just the center group, which I think is something that might be happening right now. Like, you have big communities, but it's still just a few voices that's being heard. So to create even stronger bonds within bigger communities, I think it's important to hear more voices and not just the center group.
That's a great perspective. Also, sometimes I wonder, online communities, I feel like Web3 has claimed this idea of online communities, but in a sense, they kind of already existed, right? So like we have Reddit and like all these other online communities. And I guess I'm curious to know like what sort of sets the Web3 online apart from these other online communities that have been existing from way back. Would you say that it's the blockchain technology that sets this online Web3 community apart, like DAOs and all of that? Or like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it is mainly the technology, and I think it's super interesting that you're mentioning that this is something that has been existing for a really long time. I think human beings are guilty of trying to claim things as the first thing happening ever quite often, but actually when you go back and look at history, very few things are completely new, very few things have never been thought of. A lot of it has the history already, which is worth reading in on and kind of thinking of as we're moving forward within these new spaces as well. I don't think it's that much beside the technology that is actually setting it apart. I think there is the potential of organizational technology that the blockchain can offer that is the main difference. But in terms of communicating, in terms of existing online, I don't think it's that much different if you look at, like, for example, like the very early Tumblr groups as well, like Avida Byström, Molly Soda, etc. I think structures that you see within those groups are structures that we see within our groups as well. And I mean, the structures that they had within their groups also pre-existed them. So I think, I think the main thing that's setting us apart right now is the potential of organizational structure through technology that the blockchain is offering.
That's really true. And I'm wondering also, like, what do you think, like, from your perspectives, are the biggest opportunities and challenges for creators and curators in the Web3 space? Because I feel like the whole art world, or in general, like, practices have been changing. And I'm wondering, what do you see are the biggest opportunities and also the biggest challenges right now for creators and artists in the space?
Just from like a pure kind of technology perspective as well, from more a creative point of view, I think it's interesting to kind of for them to explore the new technology as a medium, like such as Sarah Friend and a few others are doing. I think that's super interesting because it's actually exploring I wouldn't say a new technology, but have the potential actually pushing the development of that technology as well. Same goes with the organization of fans, patrons, whatever to call it, because I don't think necessarily we have the right terminology what to call these groups around artists yet. I think that is a problem that needs to be solved. That's also a really great opportunity for them to explore that. How can you actually organize and kind of maintain a community around you within a structure that's purely basically based on community? There is a lot going on with incentives, etc., but that also, I think, creates a lot of pressure on the artists to actually able to always have to provide something to keep the group interested. You can't just create, you need to create and then think about the community around you as well. In terms of challenges, I think one thing that we haven't necessarily considered at all in the early days of creating creator economies and all these kind of structures that we see around the marketplaces and within Web3 is that majority of the roles that you would normally have on other people that were supporting artists are now being put back on the artists. That means that they need to sell their art, they need to find the collectors, they need to do the reach out, they need to maintain their messaging and kind of the communication with the space around them and the community around them. Everything that was basically put on different roles within the community is now being put on one person, and that is the artist.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think we had a guest, Janse, and I want to make sure I say exactly what he said, but I'm gonna do my best. He said something about this like multiplayer mode. When it comes to the creator economy, like he kind of like divided it into like a single player mode versus a multiplayer mode. And I guess previously, or maybe currently in a sense, it's this like single player mode where the creator has to do everything, and it's a struggle, right? Versus like the multiplayer mode where you get to create with a community, you get to have a support system, and, you know, execute stuff. And so this like pluralistic like vision for the creator economy, I think is really exciting. And I know that's kind of what we're all like looking forward to. And I'm also like curious to know your thoughts on like, what is the difference between organizational and individual change? Like, which is more important for success? And would you say like DAOs could accelerate change for a wider group?
I think organizational change leads to individual change, I would say. I think that's kind of like, if you have a bigger organizational change, then that can also lead to individual change, which comes from the benefit of being within this organizational change. Because being in an organization that's changing, that usually affects your personal life and you as an individual as well. So I think it's actually more interesting to look at the organizational change, because then you have the opportunity to offer that individual change, but basically on a bigger level, rather than just go straight in and change for one person or one creator or one role, whatever. I think definitely DAOs have the potential of doing it, and I think there's a lot of interesting exploration that's happening right now. But I think a lot of DAOs that's also being set up right now is kind of using some of these terminologies, such as DAOs, just for the sake of it being a bit of a hype thing. You know, it sounds quite good to be in Web3. It sounds quite good to use the web, I would like the word DAO, whereas in fact there are basically just like a online version of a corporation or something like that. That being said, though, that does not apply to everyone. I think we have some really, really interesting DAOs out there, kind of looking to challenging, rethinking structural organizations, etc. But with that, of course, as well comes the pains of how do you organize the bigger groups? How do you make sure that everyone is being heard? How do you even make sure that decisions are made? Because I also think that the more people you have within these groups, the harder it is to actually reach a conclusion.
Speaking about, you know, groups and people, I'm also wondering, like, what do you think is a connection between like a wider cultural workforce and cultural workforce diversity?
That's definitely one thing that Web3 has done absolutely right in terms of diversity. I think that's brilliant. And that's also one thing that 100% the art world should learn from, because I mean, diversity is not a thing that the more traditional art world is good at. Frankly, it's awful, absolutely awful. So I think that's definitely one thing that they should learn from, is how Web3 has basically opened up and said that everyone's welcome. Because I mean, that should always be the aim when you're working with groups, etc. Everyone should be welcome on whatever premises. I think by opening up for the acceptance of the wider cultural workforce within Web3, I think that would also bring a perspective of diversity into the conversation, because diversity is also about kind of a bit about like opening up for the different roles, etc. as well, which is like, I mean, that's a very, very basic take on diversity, which is not necessarily the diversity we need to be discussing. But I think these two can definitely go hand in hand in terms of opening up for, I don't think one needs to exclude the other. I don't think like opening up for the cultural workforce, acknowledging those roles, needs to exclude the diversity that Web3 has opened up for. I think rather actually Web3 can open up for opening for a more diverse approach to the cultural workforce.
You being in this space, I feel like I want to really love to know like what you look at, like what kind of art or projects you maybe look at that you find interesting and that you're most excited about, and that, you know, when you're creating, like what is your kind of like your process behind that? I would love to know a bit about that.
I think one thing that's very important for me to make clear when I work within the Web3 space, I naturally work with NFTs, but I don't necessarily never use the word saying that I work with NFTs. But for me, it's like I work with art, full stop. If it happens to be NFTs, okay, that's fine. If it happens to be a painting, that's also completely fine. So I think that's like one thing that I've gotten to kind of realize within my years, even though it's not been that many years within the space, is that like it happens to be like backed by technology, but in the end, it's art that I'm working with, not necessarily very specifically about the technology. When I work with my specific projects, it's a bit of a cliche, but I mean, the art always comes first. I mean, it's kind of like working with exhibitions is a constant consideration for me, how the pieces are best displayed. Like, how can you emphasize, create conversations, create narratives, kind of push that forward within a space without with at the same time as you supporting individual pieces within this group show. Sounds like a cliche, but I very much think about the art pieces when I work. Process-wise, it's very, very different. Sometimes I work with a very, very clear concept and from there build kind of a exhibition or a project around it, or it's the other way around. It's basically I have one piece or two, three art pieces, which kind of is the starting foundation, which then kind of develops into project, exhibition, something else, etc. I am extremely excited about Sarah Friend's projects. I really, really love her pieces because I think she also pushes the narrative around collecting in a way which I think this technology kind of lends itself quite naturally to, and which I think is also an important conversation to have within the space. Like her off project, for example, the multiplayer game, the fact that you buy just the black square, but then you have to collaborate with the other collectors as well to actually find out what's really behind there, like the essay, etc. I think this is super, super interesting, which also kind of opens up for the question of, what does it mean to collect, and what is it that you're collecting? She is releasing the third iteration of Off, I think in July, but don't take me for my words on that, I'm not entirely sure. And I'm really, really excited. That's like the last and final iteration of that project. So that's actually a project I'm really, really looking forward to kind of see the final release of it, and then kind of see if there is actually potential for the collaboration between the collectors, or if it's again kind of a very individualistic take that, I've got my piece, I'm fine with that, and this is where I'm staying.
This is so interesting for me, because even thinking about real life pieces like paintings or everything, how there used to be the problem of tracing back who owns the painting and stolen paintings and all these things. I think NFTs and blockchain can solve that. Kind of, you can trace back, maybe you can interlink these NFTs with real life paintings, and there's so much things. Like even I'm thinking about interactive galleries where you can maybe explore things, or in the cities place some NFTs or some interactive art. I think for me that's probably the most exciting, and it's interesting to hear your perspective as a curator. Also, one last take on that, I would love to know, like when you, for example, curate for East Berlin, how do you choose the artist, and then how do you make sure that every artist gets their own shine, and like also how is the interaction going with like the buyers and the artists? I would love to know that.
Yeah, so just to make it clear, for any of these ones, so for any of the East Berlin shows, we haven't actually had anything per se on sale in that sense. So East Berlin has never acted as a commercial entity. Like, we've always been there to kind of facilitate a connection if there is an interest, but we've never been the one saying this piece sells for XYZ, contact us for this. In terms of selecting the pieces, for that one specifically, we started with the concept. We kind of wrote a concept from the idea of like the wildness of Berlin and kind of the craziness of its nature combined with the craziness of the city itself. From there, we reached out to a few specific artists, but we also had an open call with that one. So that one was a bit of a combination in terms of having artists contacting us in terms of submitting projects, but also us reaching out. From there, it was kind of, we knew what space we had to work with, and from there we kind of made a decision in terms of how many pieces we thought would be suitable for it. Picked the amount of pieces we wanted that we thought was fitting with the concept. In terms of creating shine, I mean, I think this is what I mean with working with what I said before, with like working with the specific art pieces. I mean, this is like a kind of a constant balance tension scenario when it comes to creating exhibitions. For me, it's the case of being extremely respectful for each art piece, like you said, making sure that they get their time and get to shine as well. At the same time, it is very, very important to create like a narrative and a story, or a path through the exhibition, etc. This is again a cliche and sounds like complete bullshit. I don't really know how to do it. I mean, it comes quite naturally for me when I see the pieces. So if I know the space that I'm working with, and if I know the pieces, I can quite easily envision that, how I want it to look. And I mean, touch wood, so far it seems to be working. Yeah, I'm very happy about that. Yeah, for me, it's about creating the right tension and the right storyline, which opens up for a narrative within the exhibition, but also for each piece, and allow them to have their space as well.
So back to this concept of like workforce and like diversity and all of that, like how does that come into play, you know, when you are like, you know, curating and, you know, preparing for these kinds of exhibitions and all the process? Like, how do you like access the pieces, you know, of other creators, you know, like how do they even access you? Like, how do they reach you? Is it through your website? You know, how does all of that work, and how do you make sure that there's a healthy balance between women and, you know, people from different countries and all of that stuff?
So to answer your question first, in terms of like the cultural workforce, etc., I mean, it's an exhibition is not a one-man show or a one-man kind of work thing. I mean, it requires a team. It requires the artists, it requires the curator, it requires the technicians, it requires the administrators. So I would say there's a lot of times when it comes to exhibitions, there's a few people who get the light on them and kind of present it as this is like the important ones, whereas the reality is in many cases there is like a team behind it, or there is like, it's definitely not just one person usually behind an exhibition, but that's also kind of, yeah, I mean, that's how a good exhibition is created, because you have people who have specific knowledge within their area. I would not be the right person to kind of hang the pieces and know how that's done in the right way, or, you know, setting up the projectors, etc. That's definitely not my expertise, but that's the technician's work instead. And usually if you work with a really good technician, they will do absolutely amazing, fantastic work. In terms of kind of thinking about the diversity within the exhibitions that I create and the ones I work with as well, of course, that's an active thing that you need to plan ahead, always be aware of and kind of think about. And I think as long as you're aware of that, and of course there's like a work that comes naturally as well. Like anywhere else when thinking about diversity, etc., I think it's just kind of setting your own goals and being very aware of them and kind of stick to them. That's the best way for me to work, is to say, okay, I want to have 50% women, or I want to have 50% with a different, you know, like things like that. It's just setting your active goals and kind of really stick to them. And that's the best way of doing it. And I mean, sadly enough, a lot of the artists is being pushed forward as well. It's usually men. So it's also, you know, actively working against that, making sure it's just not white men that we put in exhibition, etc. But it's active work. It's active work. You, I think, set the goals and be aware of them and really work towards that.
That's amazing. I was like going through your website just to, you know, do a little research on you, and I came across your about page, and you said, I have a strong interest in democratization and sustainability of the art world through nascent technologies. And I found that really interesting. Like, I don't know, we didn't touch on the sustainability aspect of it. So if you want to talk a bit about that, what were you thinking in terms of sustainability?
Can I just say one thing on the democratization? I'm not entirely sure we have actually. I think we've gotten a part on the way, but I think also democratization is a way of simplifying the problem that we usually see. I think there is a need for a more systemic change, which requires more active work, which requires more acknowledgement around the different roles and the kind of the work that's going into, let's say, creating or an exhibition, or the work that goes into kind of selling an artwork, which is not an easy task to do. So I think democratization is a step in the right direction, but I think it needs a bigger systemic change, and I don't think we've necessarily completed that one yet. Sustainability, I think also when I talk a lot about sustainability, I also talk about sustainability for the people who's in the industry. I think that's mainly what I mean actually when I mention sustainability, because I think creating environments that acknowledge work that kind of recognizes the effort that goes in, that recognizes the different roles, that recognizes the different people, which also means that there's a natural way of paying these people and paying for their work. That is what I mainly refer to when I talk about sustainability, creating workforces and working environments that's sustainable for the people in it. Because I think it's very easy to create work scenarios and environments who are not sustainable, because they tend to exhaust the workforce and the people that they have within them.
Would you say like your goal to kind of like solve these type of problems is kind of what keeps you in the space, you know, like, because usually we will ask like what keeps you going in Web3, like, because you have to have a purpose, you have to have some skin in the game, you know, you have to have the right intention. It can't just be about monetization. So would you say this is like your like thing that you want to achieve in this space?
Yeah, no, I would say so. I think, I mean, I think that's like one thing that I didn't necessarily mention in the beginning. Before I started to kind of work with blockchain and got more active in 2018-19 within this space, I was thinking about democratization of the art world for a really long time. I did work with a bunch of organizations who were working along the lines of kind of opening up for a wider representation within the art world. That being said, after a few years there, that's also why I'm skeptic to using the word democratization within it, because I think I think it simplifies the problem around like where the representation needs to happen, because I think the representation needs to happen not just on a creator's level, but it needs to happen across the cultural workforce, which also means that there needs to be representation of roles, etc., who fills a very functioning aspect, but they're not necessarily being mentioned. So yes, I think to go back to your question, yes, this is definitely something that keeps me in the space, kind of opening up for conversations around what representation mean in terms of who's working within these roles, but also what these roles are, what kind of function they fill, etc. Do we need them? If so, I would probably say in many cases, yes, we do still need them. If we do they need to be reshaped to kind of fit a better scenario or a more realistic scenario in the future? Or is it maybe the case of actually a lot of it is functioning already, but we just need to kind of acknowledge the work that's being done?
I love your take on this, and I love that you're thinking about the long-term effects on people in the space, and how, you know, these group structures and in the workforce it can look like, and also making it sustainable. And not, I feel like we talked a lot about mental health the last weeks with a lot of DAO people, and making like work sustainable and great for creators and for the people involved within Web3, I think is super important. And we want to like,
can I just add one thing on that, because it's interesting you mentioning that. I mean, the art world is notoriously known for not paying. I mean, not paying artists, not paying curators, not paying writers, not paying researchers, not paying technicians, etc. And I think a lot of this also sometimes comes from the point of view that you actually don't acknowledge this work that they're doing. And if we want to move forward within Web3 in terms of actually paying not just the creators, I think that's great that we're paying the creators, but I also think we actually need to acknowledge the wider workforce and kind of paying them as well. And as long as we don't acknowledge the importance of those roles, we're also not going to pay them. And then in fact, actually, we're not really changing anything.
Yes, agree 100%. Like you can see that with so many, not only creators, but freelancers, models, artists, photographers. It's just like very disheartening to see how much work people put in, and then they don't get the payout of it. And I always think like, why can we not establish some sort of like smart contract form or that can automate these for freelancers or people that they know, okay, like this is the amount, this is the time, like I'm getting paid no matter what. And I think that just builds their confidence as well, and that will create better creators, more well-rounded. They won't struggle financially, they will think more in terms of like, okay, how can I allocate my resources, and not, it's just a more fair playground, I think, that we could establish. But like you said, I think it's a long way, because sometimes these structures keep repeating itself. But I still have hope that we can implement these like contracts that are a bit more friendly for all participants. And we if we don't have any more thoughts on this, we really want to thank you, Stina, like so much for your contribution. Like I think it's so insightful to hear from you, your perspective, and you're such a light in this space. So thank you so much for being part of today's forum. And also I would love to know, for our community, they want probably to check you out and your work. So where could they find you on your social platforms?
I mean, the best place would probably be Twitter, as always, when it comes to crypto. My handle is it's Swedish, so it's Stina Linnea G. Might be easier if you share it as well. But that would be the best one. And then of course I have my homepage as well, but all that information is within my Twitter profile.
Thank you so much, Stina. We really appreciate that you care about the human experience in the space. I think that's very important because most of the time people are just really excited about the aesthetic side of things when it comes to technology. And I mean, it's great, but sometimes it can be a bit vague, you know? And so it's really nice that you're thinking in that area. So it's such an honor to have you in the space, you know? And yeah, thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for being a part of this forum. If you want to get more involved in our community, make sure to follow us on our social platforms. IG is newcoin.nco and our website is newcoin.org. We also have a Discord group and we will have all the links in the description below as well as Stina's links. And please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you guys have any questions, don't forget to put them in the comments below and we will see you in the next episode.